After the Waldorf Agreement is signed by the various producers and studios, and the blacklist is established, which is established only for the Hollywood 10. My father's position became that he would have to accept the idea that the blacklist existed and operate under those conditions, which meant finding work in another way, and the only way you can do that is in screenplays would be through a black market, not using your name and accepting less money. The other ways for him to function as a writer were, to write novels or plays or that kind of thing. So once he discovers that there is a market for his services, because he is approached by a producer, he, in effect, has now entered the black market. And that may have been the beginning of the black market, in a sense. So the question is, how will this market thrive and grow, or won't it? My father was always able to find work, and that's because, through a unique kind of set of circumstances, the kind of person he is, the reputation he had before, his ability to write quickly, his charm, all of these things go into, selling yourself, in effect. And so all of these went into having black market customers. Well, as you have more successful customers, other independent producers will hear of you. They'll get the word that maybe you could get Trumbo, maybe you could get Lawson, or whoever the writer might be. So my father's idea was to have as many clients as possible, and he adopted the strategy of, if he couldn't do the job, he would suggest that another writer get the job, and in that way increase the number of scripts that are being written by blacklisted writers, which of course takes jobs away from the primary market onto the black market. Now, if you looked at from a good union standpoint, he is really being a bad union member. On the other hand, they had thrown him out, so in a sense they were reaping the whirlwind, because eventually one of his scripts will win Oscars under somebody else's name. This is not good for the Writers Guild, it's not good for the Academy, and it's not good for the studios, but it's really good for blacklisted writers. So the progress is consistently, what he does is say, in a sense, I'll outwork them. The blacklist, the way this is one of the things we can do. We can write. So let's try to get as many jobs as possible and drive them from that point of view. Mexico. Moving to Mexico, nobody really quite knows why we moved to Mexico. It seemed like a good idea. The other people were moving to London or to Paris, mostly. Paris is where Julie Dassin goes. London is where Joe Losey goes, and a number of others. We couldn't get passports. So that was why we didn't go to Europe and went to Mexico instead. The political situation in the United States in 1951, when he gets out of jail, is not a pleasant one if you're on the political left. We don't know what is going to happen, and living inside the country exposes you to a lot of public problems. People burning crosses on your lawn, that kind of thing. So that's aside from whatever troubles kids might have in school, it's not a welcoming atmosphere. So going to Mexico had the advantage of lowering all your costs in terms of living, and there were ideas that perhaps there were ways of breaking into the Mexican film industry or something like that. For my father, none of this ever paid off, and in fact, we came back with far less than we had when we went down. But it was something to do. We had to move from the ranch someplace. Where would we go? Mexico seemed as good a place as any.
Were you losing the ranch?
No, well, we had to sell it. That was the, and sold it at at a bottom price, because if you are someone who is publicly unemployed, needs the money, you don't have a seller's market. You've got a buyer's market. So Mexico, however, there wasn't a flow of work yet. And while he writes some things down there, he's too far removed. Part of what he was able to do is, on site in Hollywood, at least on the phone or some other way, he can make the force of his personality known. And as you know from the letters, he's a very funny man also. He's a charmer in terms of conversation. And that's part of what you do. That's part of what, selling yourself, is. And that's one of the things that he was good at. So he had to return to the United States and start all of that up again. Right. So that was moving south was just another mistake. So while we were in Mexico, one day I was playing softball. We're at an altitude of 7,000 feet, and I fainted. It was the afternoon, and I was taken to the hospital for a checkup, and they did some x-rays, and I was misdiagnosed as having a heart problem. This actually was something that brought my father's attention to me, and he actually wrote me a letter along with a drawing that he made of heart, with the valves and the veins and the arteries, and explaining exactly what it was. My attitude was toward this heart problem was that I really don't care about it very much, but it was something that a father is very interested in, and that to me was something I was going to pay no attention to whatsoever. But at that point, I was probably 12 or 13. About the age where he can actually have extended conversations with me. And we started to do a few things together. This mostly meant going to the Fronton Palace and watching Fronton and betting small change on the various Fronton. So that was a sort of the beginning of him recognizing that I was more than just a child, in a sense. Yeah, he was always writing, and he was always separate in a sense, so that within the family he has his own digs, and we leave him alone. In other words, if you have a problem, you don't rush up to Daddy. So Cleo was is the available parent. My father, for instance, had no idea about athletics. This was not something he was interested in at all. But Cleo was very athletic. So it was Cleo who taught me how to play baseball, for instance, or things like that. And she really enjoyed all of that kind of activity. So all of those things, were hers. My father became interested in pre-Columbian art because his friend George Pepper had started collecting some. And George was the kind of man who was a natural collector. And he would collect anything, wherever he was. He would find something and become interested, and then would start to accumulate. So my father decided that this was something that he could do also. And so he would go to the brick pits, and we would, the people would come up with torsos or figures or heads or whatever, and he would bargain and dicker, and we would gradually, he built his own little collection of pre-Columbian art.
And did he get that?
In the letters, there is a description of crossing the border, along with his everything else that we had, that we owned, which was all stashed in a trailer. And crossing the border, the Mexican authorities open the trailer and discover what is actually not a pre-Columbian artifact, but a plaster cast of a Mayan head that is sold by the museum. They decided this was, of course, a real item, and that, my father was an international art smuggler, and kind of took apart the whole trailer. At which point they discovered, what little pieces he did have, which he then arranged to reship to Mexico, back to Mexico City, and then have them in one way or another transported up to him in Los Angeles by a more secure route. So that was the great unveiling of his collection. We drove down to Mexico City from Los Angeles, and then we drove on the west coast of Mexico, and then my sister, the dog, the cat, and I, and my father drove up to Brownsville, Texas, and from then across the country up through Route 66 into Los Angeles, which a long car trip.
Action.
We needed to be back, but I personally, I had no idea what to expect, or what Los Angeles was like, because in fact I hadn't lived in Los Angeles since when we moved out in 1947. So now I'm coming back. I'm 13 or 14 years old. I don't have an experience of Los Angeles. I don't know what it's like. I haven't lived there really, and what it will be like in Los Angeles, I have no idea. Where we're going to live, what's it like there? What do people do? I have no idea of any of those kind of things. So I'm not a city kid, in a sense. I lived in the country, and then we lived in in Mexico City, and now I'm coming. It's like a very. I might as well have been going for the first time. Essentially, I had adopted the idea that, well, we'll get there and we'll find out, and I may be tentative, but I'm willing to deal with it when we get there and complain then, rather than be fearful of what's coming.
Right.
I was apprehensive in a sense, like, what's Los Angeles like, was what I asked Cleo. And I'm sure she was reassuring that everything will be fine. But I just didn't know anything about it, so it was like going a strange place.
How'd you?
Yeah. Now his attitude and his ideas really don't change that much. He doesn't have a dramatic change as a human being. I'm now this, and I don't think he regretted things that he had done in the past. Might not do them again, but it's not it wasn't a cause for apology particularly, or for regret. It was, oh well, we did that, didn't work out,
Mm-hmm.
so on and on. Because he didn't. He saw no purpose really in dwelling, in the past, on the past. That doing so, in fact, could got you absolutely no place. In a sense, what happens if you dwell in the past? What you're trying to do is return there. It's sort of like people who dream of the perfect society returning to Eden, in a sense. Well, you never get there. So I mean, you have to deal with what's in front of you, and that's something that he was able to do quite well.
I guess the main